Qyburn had always yearned for the mysteries beyond mortal ken, knowledge that had eluded even the wisest maesters of the citadel. Stripped of his chain and spurned by the order he once served, he found his home in the darkest recesses of the Red Keep, where prying eyes dared not wander and tongues fell silent in the echoing corridors. The blackness beneath the royal stronghold offered him a perfect laboratory of pain, of human will bent and broken. Yet, as the moon rose over King's Landing, illuminating the labyrinthine alleyways and the soaring towers, Qyburn did not dwell on past losses. He saw only the promise of forbidden power and the exaltation of secrets that might grant him immortality in the annals of men. Each night, he studied ancient tomes borrowed or perhaps stolen, from corners of the world known only to those with the cunning to look. Ghostly bits of knowledge, gleaned from volumes bound in human skin, wound through Qyburn's clever mind. The fields of alchemy, blood magic, and monstrous science beckoned him like a siren's call. The clang of forged steel from the keep's armory and the low hum of the city's restless throng faded into background noise as he immersed himself in the dusty pages of unholy treatises. In candlelit gloom, he scrawled formulae on scraps of parchment, chanting half-forgotten incantations under his breath. He had tested these incantations and potions on the wretched and the forgotten. Street urchins plucked off the cobblestones, petty criminals no one would miss, beggars too weak to fight back when royal guards dragged them away under the moonlight. Through countless hidden atrocities, Qyburn's craft improved. He discovered new thresholds of human tolerance. He unearthed ways to keep flesh alive long after it should have perished. Nerves, twisted and manipulated, kept bodies twitching when the soul ought to have fled. Muscles fused with stranger substances, forging monstrous forms capable of inhuman feats. Still, Qyburn wanted more than these gutter rejects. He yearned for raw material that brimmed with the essence of nobility, for bloodlines steeped in the tradition of leadership, men whose spirits and physiques might withstand the vile rigors of his experimentation. Thus, he turned his gaze upon the lords of Westeros. A cunning rumor here, a bribe there, and soon enough whispers spread that Qyburn's black science could free them from mortal frailties. Some came willingly, seeking cures for maladies that defied the healing arts. Others were lured by illusions of augmenting their strength and cunning through arcane means. And then, there were those who were unfortunate enough to find themselves in his clutches by misfortune or political convenience. Lords whose disappearance might be overlooked in the constant swirl of courtly intrigue. King's Landing thrummed with new tensions. Rumors circulated, half-believed, that certain noblemen who visited Qyburn never came back quite the same. Whispers surfaced of lords returning to their distant keeps only to vanish behind locked doors, or appearing at court changed in ways one could not readily name. Cersei Lannister, enthroned in her precarious seat of power, chose to ignore such talk if it served her ends. She wanted only one thing, absolute dominion, and if Qyburn's unholy creations helped maintain her grip on the realm, so be it. Thus, cloaked in the Queen Regent's wary tolerance and buoyed by her thirst for an advantage, Qyburn's twisted experiments lurked under the surface of official condemnation. He had run of the dungeons, the forced silence of the city, and authority, often whispered from lips that feared what he might do if not kept close. In a hidden chamber deep below the Red Keep, behind solid oak doors carved with hideous faces that seemed to writhe in torchlight, Qyburn prepared for his greatest endeavor. His hunched form glided over tables laden with apparatus, tubes of swirling liquids, metal clamps stained with old blood, and jars containing lumps of flesh suspended in translucent fluid. A skeletal rat pinned to a board squeaked with reanimated terror. Qyburn did not flinch. His attention was locked on a grand stone slab in the chamber's center. There lay his subject for the night, Lord Allard of House Brax, stripped to the waist, eyes darting with dread. Once a proud figure with the confidence of high birth, he was now a trembling shell, sweat glistening on his forehead, wrists and ankles shackled with iron. A candlelit brazier cast flickering shadows on the walls, dancing like mocking phantoms around the prone lord. Qyburn offered a sweet, apologetic smile, as if he were a kindly maester tending a patient. "Forgive me, my lord," he said softly, voice smooth as an oiled hinge. Pain is a catalyst. Without it, we cannot unlock the gates of possibility. He let that statement hang in the stale air, while Lord Allard's labored breath rasped louder than the distant drip of moisture from the dungeon ceiling. "Release me," Allard muttered, eyes bloodshot. "By the Crown's authority, I have my rights." The words came out broken and halting, splintered by the creeping terror that clung to every corner of the room. Qyburn tilted his head. That gentle smile stayed, a veneer of practiced detachment. He traced the edges of runes carved into the slab's surface, ancient glyphs older than any faith of the Seven Text. The runes glimmered faintly, as if hungry for what was to come. Qyburn had copied them from manuscripts rumored to have been penned in Valeria's final days, texts he believed could harness the raw power needed to reshape both body and mind. "Your rights are precisely what brought you to me, my lord. The right to become more than mortal. The right to evolve beyond your paltry limitations. Now hold still. What happens next will define your future." Allard tugged at his bonds, tears cutting paths down his cheeks. "I'd rather die," he gasped. "The gods." Qyburn stifled a chuckle. "The gods are silent down here," he whispered, leaning close enough for his breath to brush Allard's ear. "Now, be brave." Then the instruments came forth, needles forged of Valyrian steel, scalpels honed to an exquisite sharpness. Bowls of black fluid simmered in the brazier's heat. In the corner, a caged raven cawed, echoing the dread that clung to the stone walls. Day and night lost meaning in Qyburn's realm. Hours melted together in a crucible of agony. The watery screams of Lord Allard Brax reverberated along the corridors, though they rarely reached the ears of those above. And if they did, no one dared intervene. Qyburn was an architect of horrors. Blood ran in rivulets from the stone slab. He scribbled meticulous notes, working with the precision of a craftsman. When Allard's heart threatened to stop, Qyburn forced a potion distilled from the dark essence of Shadowbinders down his throat, dragging him back from the edge of death. The circle of runes glowed in baleful light, swirling with the malignant energy of captive souls. If the old legends were to be believed, a hideous aura settled upon Allard's trembling body. When at last Qyburn relented, he stepped back, panting with exertion. He had delved deeper into forbidden arts than ever before. Lord Allard still clung to life, but something about him had changed. His muscles coiled with unfamiliar strength. His eyes, once a soft green, now shimmered with a faint silver. Qyburn watched, enthralled, as Allard, though weak, tested the manacles. The iron groaned, and with a ragged cry, he tore one shackle free, leaving behind torn flesh and a ghastly wound. Qyburn's lips curved in a triumphant smirk. "Yes," he breathed, "this will do nicely." Above, in the realm of sunlight, King's Landing carried on. Intrigue spun in royal corridors, merchants plied their trades at the port, and commoners gossiped in the winding alleys of Flea Bottom. Soldiers and whores roamed under the same shimmering sun, neither aware of the evil gestating beneath their feet. Cersei Lannister, in her sanctum, toyed with the idea of summoning Qyburn to show his progress. She knew only that he promised her a weapon unlike any the realm had seen. Cersei, driven by a thirst for unchallenged authority, was prepared to accept any means to keep her enemies at bay. The resurrection of Ser Gregor Clegane was proof enough of Qyburn's competence. But that was child's play compared to what he now pursued. In the dungeon labs, Qyburn refined his process. He systematically collected lords who had lost favor or grown too curious, all courtesy of bribes and threats orchestrated by sellswords loyal to the Queen's gold. Once captured or coerced, they vanished into his chambers, emerging later as altered beings. The potions grew more potent, the runes more complex, the surgeries more extreme. Noble blood, Qyburn realized, held a vitality that lesser subjects lacked, allowing them to withstand the transformations. Soon he had a growing legion of monstrous lords, each sworn to the crown with unshakable devotion. Their eyes gleamed with silver or gold in the half-light, as though fragments of Qyburn's arcane spark now resided in them. Their sinews bunched with unholy strength, their minds sharpened by twisted resilience. And perhaps most terrifying of all, they retained enough wit to pass among fellow nobles. Cersei finally descended into the dungeons, flanked by 2 Queensguard loyal to her alone. The torchlight pushed back the surrounding darkness, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The stench of death and old blood permeated the corridors. Yet she pressed on, her appetite for power overcoming her revulsion. In a wide chamber, half a dozen of Qyburn's creations stood at attention. They were tall, their bearing aristocratic, yet something in their presence unsettled the queen. Their gazes were too steady, their silence too absolute. Qyburn emerged from the shadows, dipping his head in a low bow. "Your Grace," he said, gesturing toward the silent host. "Behold the vanguard of the crown." Cersei advanced, her pulse quickening. She recognized one of the figures, a minor lord she had met at a tourney years ago. Now his face was impossibly pale, and a silvery glow shone in his eyes. Slowly, she lifted a hand toward him, but she stopped short. "They will obey?" she asked, voice echoing off the stone. "With perfect devotion," Qyburn replied smoothly. "Fear, hunger, even conscience no longer limit them. They retain the cunning of their noble lineage, and as you see, their bodies are augmented by my art, a living bulwark for the crown." Cersei drew in a slow breath, picturing the unstoppable terror these altered lords could unleash on her foes. "We'll install them across the 7 kingdoms, quietly. Let no one suspect until it is too late." She glanced at Qyburn, a hint of caution mingling with her pride. "Continue. Bring more into the fold." Qyburn bowed, eyes glinting. "It shall be done, Your Grace." And so the infiltration began. The monstrous lords slipped back to their ancestral seats, or replaced heirs who had gone missing. From there, they bent vassals to their will, consolidated local power, and built clandestine forces. Now and again, rumors trickled back to the city. Lordlings who never slept, knights with glow-lit eyes, or keeps that barred their doors to visitors. But those tales spread in half-whispered fragments. Meanwhile, Qyburn's network of bribes and assassinations silenced any who might have exposed the crown's new horrors. Not everyone in Westeros was blind to the shift. In the north, ravens carried cryptic tidings. In Dorne, proud princes grumbled about delegates who seemed neither fully alive nor truly human. Talk of devilry arose in taverns, or in the hush of castle kitchens. The High Sparrow, alarmed by confessions of the unfortunate who had glimpsed the Red Keep's bowels, tried to rally the faith, only to have his efforts quashed by the Queen's monstrous protectors. One by one, foes of Cersei vanished, often spirited away by hooded men in the dead of night. The transformation spread like a dark plague, sapping the realm's spirit in slow, inexorable steps. Night after night, Qyburn toiled below the Red Keep, perfecting his unholy craft. Each new subject pushed the boundaries further. Some transformations melded necromancy with surgical grafts. Others introduced arcane potions derived from artifacts rumored to be from Ashai or beyond. Qyburn's journals filled with cramped writing. Spells to extinguish free will, recipes for potions that made the blood run like quicksilver, diagrams of bones restructured for unnatural resilience. His legion multiplied, and his methods grew more refined. The city's underbelly churned with fearful whispers. Ordinary folk spoke of nightmares in which pale-eyed lords roamed their streets, demanding fealty in the name of the crown. Over cups of sour ale, soldiers muttered about illusions and curses, all the while glancing over their shoulders. Yet fear kept them compliant, and gold kept some tongues quiet. Cersei, reveling in her newfound might, orchestrated lavish festivities to distract the populace. She flaunted her monstrous retainers in plain sight, passing them off as loyal knights. Sometimes, those lords engaged in subtle conversation with unsuspecting guests, learning of outside plots or sniffing out potential threats. More than once, a casual word exchanged at a feast led to a midnight arrest, followed inevitably by another transformation in Qyburn's lair. Thus, the cycle perpetuated. Power fed fear, and fear fueled more power. Yet the cost weighed on Qyburn's mind, if only slightly. he sensed a growing tension among his creations. Although each was sworn to absolute loyalty, fragments of their old identities lingered beneath the forced devotion. Some congregated in lonely corridors, whispering about half-remembered lives and the families they had lost. A few expressed resentment, though it was quickly suppressed by the spells woven into their flesh. These flickers of disobedience troubled Qyburn, but he believed his incantations and potions remained foolproof. He delved deeper into shadow-binding lore to tighten his grip, consulting black scrolls rumored to have been compiled by sorcerers in the long night. He experimented with extracts gleaned from wights beyond the wall, injecting them into new subjects. The results were staggering. Heightened strength, dulled emotion, near invulnerability to pain. His success inflated his pride until he saw himself as a visionary. Where the Citadel had cast him out, he now stood triumphant, forging the future of the Seven Kingdoms. Over time, the monstrous lords grew so numerous and strategically placed that anyone with an ounce of sense recognized a silent coup had taken hold. Fealty to the crown became obligatory, even in areas historically independent. Lords who tried to protest found themselves outmaneuvered or crushed outright, often by a handful of Qyburn's creations who wielded the strength of a dozen knights. The small folk took to prayer and superstition, seeing omens of disaster in every raven's caw or unnatural storm. Some tried to flee, others adapted, hoping to avoid notice by the crown's unnatural enforcers. For a while, it appeared Qyburn's legion was unstoppable. Yet pockets of resistance formed. Unscrupulous mercenaries who'd lost friends in the dungeons, knights who valued honor above life, and peasants driven to desperation by their lord's transformations gathered in secret. Their cells were small, scattered, but determined. They sent coded messages and hushed pleas for aid to distant corners of the realm. Anyone who might stand against the monstrous tide. Most efforts ended in disaster, with Qyburn's mutated lords descending on the would-be rebels in the night, leaving behind only blood and broken weapons. Still, rumors persisted of a growing underground, a hidden network that believed Qyburn's abominations could be felled by certain relics or old magics the crown had overlooked. Qyburn caught wind of such talk and redoubled his efforts. He created a secret kill switch of sorts, an incantation bound to each subject's heart. Should any abomination waver in loyalty, Qyburn would utter a single phrase in a language older than the first men, instantly dissolving flesh and bone in a wave of agony. This measure reassured Circe when she learned of it. She could ill afford an internal uprising among these powerful creatures. With newfound confidence, Qyburn continued expanding his network. More lords vanished into the labyrinth, re-emerging as instruments of his will. Armies that once fought each other in petty disputes now bowed in terrified obedience. The queen gloated as her influence spread across Westeros. Coin flowed into her coffers, even as her monstrous retinue tightened its hold over trade routes and local governance. The faith shrank into irrelevance. The citadel cowered in stony silence, and the common folk endured in quiet misery. But black magic leaves a stain. Ominous dreams plagued the realm. Storms lashed the coasts in unseasonable fury. Lightning flashing in skies tinted a sickly green. Wolves prowled the borders of farmland, howling at the moon as if possessed. Ravens massed on rooftops, their cries echoing at odd hours. Some insisted that the children of the forest stirred in the depths of the north, alarmed by the growing desecration in the south. In King's Landing itself, illusions and apparitions became the talk of hushed rumor. Shapes drifting through alleyways at night, flickers of unnatural light above the red keep's ramparts. Even Qyburn was not immune to the creeping sense of doom. Though he wrote it off as fatigue, he found himself glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see shapes in the gloom. The runes he used glowed brighter with every new procedure, as if fed by a mounting cosmic hunger. Sometimes, when the pain-laced screams of a subject echoed through the dungeon corridors, Qyburn heard a deeper resonance in the shadows, like an ancient entity stirring. He pressed onward, determined to master whatever intangible forces he had called up. The unstoppable momentum of his dark science refused to yield. One night, As Qyburn meticulously dissected a rebellious bannerman on the stone slab, a figure stepped quietly into the chamber. It was Lord Allard Brax, his first full success. The luminous sheen in Allard's eyes pulsed gently in the torchlight. Once, Qyburn might have called him a masterpiece, but something in Allard's gaze hinted at turmoil. "Speak," Qyburn said, without looking up from his work. Allard knelt, a gesture more mechanical than reverent. "My lord," he said, his voice bearing the stiffness of compulsion. "Some of us are uneasy." Qyburn paused. "Elaborate." Allard hesitated, jaw clenching. "We remember fragments of who we were. Our families, our old loyalties. Some question why we serve. They wonder if there is no escape from this half-life." A trembling note entered his voice. "They ask if you will release them, or if they must force their own release." Qyburn set down his scalpel, fixing Allard with a stare colder than steel. "There is no release, only the duty we share. You owe your existence to me. Inform any who harbor doubts that I can end them with a word. If they do not value their new purpose, they will forfeit it." Allard bowed his head, warring expressions playing across his features. "Yes, master." As Allard departed, Qyburn returned to his bloody task. The faintest shred of doubt needled his thoughts. He had become adept at forging monstrous obedience, but the hearts of men were fickle, even when twisted by arcane means. He resolved to craft further measures to quell discontent, dipping deeper into necromantic arts that promised absolute control. The spells sapped him, leaving him pale and drained, yet the fear of losing his creations spurred him on. Days turned to weeks. Another wave of transformations swelled the Legion's ranks, further tightening the crown's grip. Rebellious lords were systematically crushed. Blood ran in the courtyards of defiant keeps, and entire families disappeared overnight. Circe, swathed in silks and gold, admired her reflection in polished mirrors. She felt the tension in the air but convinced herself it was the price of total supremacy. If nightmares haunted her, she buried them under wine and lavish feasts. Then, without warning, the first open revolt among Qyburn's twisted lords erupted. A handful of older subjects, battered by half-remembered notions of honor and decency, barricaded themselves in a section of the dungeons. They liberated a few captives waiting for transformation, hoping to free them before Qyburn's knife could carve into bone and blood. When Qyburn's loyal creatures arrived, chaos ensued, monstrous strength clashing in torchlit corridors. The rebels roared in defiance, their silver-lit eyes filled with a raw desperation. Qyburn rushed in, chanting an incantation to trigger his kill switch. Dark magic slammed through the subterranean air. Some rebels collapsed, convulsing as their insides boiled. Yet their leader, Lord Mullendor of the Reach, fought through the pain. He launched himself at Qyburn, black claws erupting from his fingertips. Qyburn stumbled back, horror creeping over him. Never had one of his creations resisted a kill switch so completely. But another monstrous lord, still loyal, tackled Mullendor mid-lunge. The two abominations mauled each other in a storm of sharpened teeth and fists. Gritting his teeth, Qyburn repeated the incantation at a fever pitch. Mullendor shrieked, eyes bulging as runes burned white-hot across his chest. At last, he died, crumpling to the floor with a sickening hiss. The remaining rebels, too injured or disoriented to continue, were dragged away for disposal. A hush descended on the tunnels. Lord Allard Brax found Qyburn in the aftermath, trembling with fury. "Master," Allard said, bowing, "we have contained the situation." Qyburn let out a shaking breath. "Dispose of the bodies. Burn them." Though he tried to maintain composure, his chest tightened at the realization. The enchantments were not unbreakable. If even a fraction of his creations discovered how to resist, it could unravel everything. He reported the incident to Circe, who seethed but trusted Qyburn's reassurance that the threat was contained. She demanded tighter controls, which Qyburn promised. Inside, he seethed at the memory of Mullendor's final, defiant gaze. He refused to let that happen again. His nights became an endless cycle of dark ceremonies aimed at reinforcing loyalty, forging deeper bonds of blood and spell. He layered new curses upon the old, injecting fresh potions into his subjects. Whenever fear tugged at him, he drowned it with pride, telling himself he was at the verge of perfecting a new breed of rulers. The realm, hammered into submission by monstrous power, would become a fortress unchallenged by any foe. The infiltration continued, unstoppable. In every region, lords with silvery eyes and unnatural stamina commanded small armies loyal to the crown. They stifled dissent with lethal precision. The realm's trade routes and farmland fell under their watchful gaze. They might stand motionless for hours, scanning roads for signs of rebellion, or gliding silently through castle corridors, sniffing out covert plots. The few who dared defy them or question their nature quickly vanished, buried in unmarked graves or dragged into the labyrinth beneath the Red Keep for induction into Qyburn's legion. And yet, the air of dread grew thick. The unnatural storms hammered coastal cities, while farmland withered from oppressive heat and sudden chills. Fishermen reported monstrous silhouettes lurking off the shores. Trappers in the woods recounted encounters with beasts of uncanny size and ferocity. Whispers of a deeper evil coiled in the hearts of men. Priests of the old gods and the faith of the Seven alike muttered that Qyburn's experiments had pierced a veil that should never have been touched. Something older and hungrier stirred in the dark, drawn by the torrent of agonized souls and corrupt magic. Qyburn dismissed these superstitions, but even he could not deny a sense of being watched. An invisible weight pressed down on his laboratory, the runes flickering with an intensity that made the hairs on his arms stand upright. He forbade anyone from entering during his most secret rites, not even Circe. Sometimes he dreamt of a massive maw opening in blackness, ringed with spectral flame, devouring the tortured souls he fed it. He awoke shaken, though not enough to abandon his quest. The monstrous lords, too, displayed sporadic signs of restlessness. The compulsion binding them was powerful, yet an undercurrent of frustration and gloom rippled through their ranks. Conversations grew more furtive. Some, like Allard Brax, wrestled constantly with traces of their old conscience. Though Qyburn and Circe maintained tight oversight, cracks appeared. When word reached Qyburn of small rebel enclaves forming in remote corners of the realm, old caves, hidden valleys, half-ruined forts, he dispatched abominations to crush them. Usually this succeeded, but now and then, the monstrous lords returned with unsettling injuries that healed too slowly, or reported that they had encountered sorcery they could not easily overcome. Old powers, once dormant, were being awakened by the corruption Qyburn had introduced. Despite these omens, Qyburn continued forging new horrors. He refined the infusion of white essence, hoping to create unstoppable brutes that combined undead resilience with living intelligence. He experimented with the blood of certain beasts rumored to hold magical properties. He spliced fragments of arcane glyphs beneath the skin, believing it would fortify loyalty. Each success left him feeling invincible, yet each step deepened the shadow that lay over the realm. One moonlit night, a hush blanketed the Red Keep. Most courtiers slept or dined in smaller gatherings. Qyburn, restless, wandered the corridors above his laboratory. His footsteps echoed sharply. As he passed a window, he saw a silhouette perched on the battlements. One of his creatures, gazing at the moon. He recognized the figure's posture, Allard Brax. Quietly, Qyburn approached, half curious, half wary. Allard stood in silence, silver-lit eyes distant as if fixated on an unseen horizon. For a moment, Qyburn noticed the tremor in Allard's hand, the faint breath rattling in his chest. Despite the unnatural transformation, some vestige of humanity lingered. Qyburn cleared his throat. "Allard," he said. Allard did not turn. "Master, what keeps you here, in the night's chill?" A long pause. "I was remembering." The air felt like home. Braxlands, a summer wind. "I cannot recall the details, only the feeling." He exhaled, shoulders sagging. "Sometimes, I wonder if these memories are truly mine, or if they are illusions conjured by your spells." Qyburn's voice hardened. They are your memories, but your life now is in service to the realm. We must cast off these mortal ties to reach our true potential." Allard nodded mechanically. "Yes, master." Yet the despair in his tone was undeniable. Qyburn placed a hand on Allard's shoulder, more a gesture of ownership than comfort. "Return to your duties," he said, voice soft but edged with command. Allard bowed and slipped away, leaving Qyburn alone beneath the moonlight. For a moment, the ex-maester felt an unfamiliar pang, perhaps regret or some vestige of empathy. He shivered as a cold wind swept in from Blackwater Bay. Morning arrived, and with it, fresh demands from Cersei. Another round of abductions had gone awry. A would-be captive escaped, fleeing north with incriminating knowledge of Qyburn's methods. The Queen demanded retribution. Qyburn promised swift action, dispatching more monstrous lords to hunt the fugitive. Tension simmered as he supervised their departure. He assured Cersei that none could hide from his legion, but privately he feared any slip in secrecy. The realm could not know the full extent of his operations, at least not until it was too late to resist. Even so, a new wave of transformations commenced. Barely a week later, more lords, knights, and influential commoners found themselves strapped to Qyburn's slab. Screams echoed anew, fueling the runes carved in the stone floor. The black fluid roiled in copper basins, thick with the distilled essence of unknown horrors. Qyburn chanted his incantations, forging abominations that stretched the boundaries of mortal design. Their eyes gleamed with otherworldly light, their muscles coiled with ephemeral might, their voices rang with an inescapable authority. They were, in a perverse sense, perfection, but perfection carried its own flaws. The deeper Qyburn delved, the more the realm writhed under the weight of his abominations. Men and women of conscience could not turn a blind eye forever. Though Qyburn's monstrous lords were fearsome, the spirit of Westeros held pockets of defiance. Those small rebel enclaves began to unify in secret. Word reached them of certain vulnerabilities in Qyburn's magic. Old runes, certain weirwood enchantments, tools crafted by the children of the forest that could short-circuit necromancy. Hints, rumors, half-truths, scattered but hopeful. Armed with these fragments of knowledge, the rebels planned a daring strike on King's Landing itself, hoping to spark a revolt that would topple the monstrous regime. Qyburn remained largely unaware of this brewing plan. He focused on consolidating power, fending off minor threats, and ever perfecting his brood. On some level, he sensed that the noose of destiny tightened around him, that each new atrocity cast a longer shadow on the realm. But pride and ambition spurred him on. He had come too far to recant. He was the hand that shaped the future, the black flame that would transform the kingdom. Night fell again as it always did. In Qyburn's hidden sanctum, runes glowed with savage light, reflecting off stone walls slick with condensation and old gore. A fresh captive, a noble from the Vale who had dared to speak too boldly against the crown, lay strapped to the slab, eyes wide with horror. Qyburn hovered, chanting in a language that twisted the mind. The victim's screams mingled with an otherworldly resonance, sending echoes through the labyrinth. Yet beyond that wail of pain, Qyburn heard another sound, a distant rumble, as though an approaching storm, or perhaps the footsteps of doom. He forced the thoughts away. His scalpel glinted in the torchlight as he opened flesh to pour in the swirling concoctions that would birth another loyal monstrosity. If fear stirred in his heart, he buried it under method and formula. The crown was rising, unstoppable, and so was he. With each new subject, his dominion over life and death grew. The runes flared, the captive thrashed, and Qyburn laughed in quiet exultation. In that moment, deep below a castle that had seen dragons and Targaryens, the forging of a new tyrannical order felt complete. The old ways, honor, chivalry, the illusions of moral constraint, had no place in Qyburn's vision. He would rewrite the rules of power. House Lannister would reign supreme, guarded by an army made not of steel and sinew alone, but of black magic and unholy science. And it would all be done under the silent watch of the Iron Throne. But the storms gathering outside King's Landing did not merely belong to the changing weather. They were the outward sign of forces older than men, older even than the doom-haunted glyphs Qyburn scrawled. The shape of that cosmic retribution remained unclear, but it loomed like a dark star on the horizon. For every shriek, every drop of noble blood spilled on cursed stone, the world drew closer to a moment of reckoning. Above ground, the moonlit towers gleamed. Circe drank from a goblet, half lost in reverie. The hush of night cloaked the city's secrets. But in alleyways and taverns, in hidden glens far from the Red Keep's gaze, men and women prepared for a confrontation they knew could cost them everything. Some prayed for the gods' mercy, some pinned their hopes on ancient magic, and some placed faith in steel or cunning alone. Whether any of them could stand against Qyburn's legion of mutant lords was another question entirely. For now, Qyburn's night of alchemy persisted uninterrupted. The brazier hissed, the runes flared, and the victims' screams subsided into ragged, hopeless moans. A new creation was born in agony, bound body and soul to the crown. Qyburn's grin never wavered. He might have been a maestro conducting a symphony of anguish, each note drawing him closer to the apex of his ambition. Yet in the darkest corners of that chamber, where light from the torches could not reach, shifting shadows seemed to watch him with an almost sentient malice. If Qyburn felt their gaze, he gave no sign, pressing on as the luminous eyes of his new subject flickered open. A faint silver glow pulsed there, as if responding to the unspoken command of its master. Another chord in the grand, discordant music of Qyburn's new world. Another brick in the edifice of horror that defended the crown. And so the 7 kingdoms slouched onward, an uneasy hush blanketing the land. Each day Qyburn's monstrous transformation spread, and each day faint whispers of resistance grew. The question that gripped every whispered rumor, every prayer before the fading gods, was how long this equilibrium could last. How long before the abominations shattered their yoke, or the realm rose up in righteous fury? How long before the darkness Qyburn summoned devoured him from within? But those were concerns for tomorrow. Tonight, only the drip of blood into the gutter, the hiss of arcane fluid, and the gentle murmur of Qyburn's incantation existed. He had what he always craved: power over life and death, noble and lowborn. What was left of his conscience lay buried under the cold stones of the Red Keep, sealed away with the souls of those lords who once strode proud under banners and crests. They were his to command now, a legion of mutated nightmares sworn to defend the crown. And for that night at least, Qyburn's victory seemed complete. The torches guttered in the humid darkness beneath the Red Keep, their feeble flames dancing against walls caked with grime and the ghosts of old blood. Qyburn allowed himself a rare moment of stillness, standing in the center of his hidden sanctum where the runes on the stone floor still glowed from the last transformation. The noble from the Vale, once a broad-shouldered man of proud ancestry, now lay supine on the slab, chest heaving, eyes gleaming with the eerie radiance that marked Qyburn's brood. Guards of a peculiar sort hovered near the walls. 6 lords he had long since transformed, their postures upright yet unnaturally stiff, as if they were puppets on invisible strings. Into that hush, a ragged exhale escaped the newly created abomination. Qyburn stepped forward, ignoring the congealing fluid on his instruments, and brushed the back of his gloved hand across the man's brow. The eyes flicked open at his touch, now tinged with that metallic luster, a mingling of life and something else. The runes underfoot gave off a final sparkle and subsided to a dull glow. "You live for the crown now," Qyburn whispered, words coaxing the last vestiges of resistance out of his subject. "Your will is ours, your strength is ours, and your soul, if such a thing exists, belongs to me," he added silently. The captive-turned creature tried to rise, as if compelled by some final flicker of mortal will, but the arcane bonds pulsing in his veins would not allow it. Instead, he sank back onto the slab, panting like a wounded dog. Qyburn made a note on a scrap of parchment. Another one claimed, another weapon for Circe. Only a handful remained to be processed this night, but dawn was not so close that he needed to rush. He cast a glance at the others in the room. Nearest the door stood Lord Allard Brax, the first of Qyburn's newborns. Even with the pall of partial undeath clinging to him, Allard's form retained the aristocratic build of the Brax line, a line well known in the Westerlands. Qyburn saw tension in Allard's jaw that betrayed an ember of emotion. Anytime Qyburn caught it, he reminded himself how close even his best work could come to faltering. That small, unquenched spark was a puzzle. How deeply must he carve into the mind to extinguish it? Before he could pursue the thought, Allard inclined his head. "Master, the Queen summons you." The summons was unsurprising. After the debacle of the small revolt in the labyrinth, a failed uprising by rebellious abominations, Cersei had demanded frequent updates, every shift in Qyburn's methods meticulously reported. He set his notes aside. "Secure this one," he instructed, gesturing to the latest test subject. "See that he does not stir until I return." Allard bowed, and Qyburn passed by him without a glance, ascending stone steps slick with the damp cold that never seemed to leave the bowels of the Red Keep. He reached a corridor lit by iron sconces, dust drifting in the stale air. Though the fortress above bustled with politics and courtly nonsense by day, these lower halls stayed mostly silent unless Qyburn strode through with his retinue. Or unless, as often happened, new screams echoed from below. He approached one of the hidden passageways that allowed him direct access to Cersei's solar. The door, cleverly built into the wall, opened after he pressed a particular stone on the frame. Quietly, he stepped into a corridor that adjoined the Queen's private chambers. 2 Queen's Guard waited, stoic as statues. They made way for him without comment. There was no question of his authority in the Queen's household. He nodded once and pushed the door open. Cersei Lannister stood by a narrow window of worked glass, hands clasped behind her back. The silhouette of her fine gown cast elongated shadows across a carpet dyed in crimson. A half-empty goblet of wine glimmered on a small table. Though the hour was late, she wore the sort of finery that suggested she had attended, or planned to attend, a private gathering of her favorites. The candlelight caught her golden hair, framing a face still proud but etched with lines of tension. She stared out at King's Landing's rooftops, lit only faintly by moonlight. "Your Grace," Qyburn said, offering a slight bow. Cersei turned, her posture rigid. "We have matters to discuss." She tapped a finger against her folded arms. "Reports from the north suggest one of our transformed lords was discovered and destroyed by local resistance, near the outskirts of Moat Cailin." Qyburn's eyes flickered with surprise. He had not been informed of a loss in the north, let alone a destruction. "Destroyed, Your Grace? By whom?" "A pack of wild men in the service of some Karstark girl, if the rumors are to be believed." Cersei's voice was taut. "They ambushed him while he traveled under night's cover. Perhaps they used sorcery of some sort. I don't know. The details are scarce, but the message is clear. Your creations are not invincible." The words rang like an accusation, and Qyburn suppressed a flash of annoyance. He took a measured breath. "No, they are not. But the chance of such an event was always present. Even the best knight can be felled by cunning or hidden magics. We remain unmatched in open battle, but if a clever foe seek out one of my lords in an isolated place, employing old spells or weirwood relics, there is always risk." Cersei's frown deepened. She moved away from the window. "They found a method, Qyburn, and if they found one, others can. We must respond." He inclined his head. "I am refining a new process, Your Grace. I've discovered a technique that binds each subject to the crown more irrevocably. Should the physical body be compromised, the core of their being will dissolve before any foe can extract secrets or glean weaknesses." "And how many more do you plan to create?" She snatched up her goblet, took a long swallow. "Half the lords in Westeros have gone missing or returned with silver eyes. There are rumors in the taverns, among the sellswords, among my own guards. Even the small folk talk. You promised me an advantage, but if our advantage becomes common knowledge..." Qyburn interjected softly. "We must press forward until we have ensured no house or region can rise effectively against us." A few rumors won't topple your throne. Fear works in our favor. Most of them dare not defy you. And any who do, he shrugged. They vanish. Cersei's expression hardened. For a moment, she looked past him at the flickering torch on the wall, as if measuring her own tolerance for such monstrous means. Then she released a slow breath and nodded. Very well. Step up our efforts, but do it discreetly. We cannot afford to have open rebellion in multiple kingdoms. Of course, Your Grace. He bowed again, deeper this time. If I may ask, have there been developments in the West? I heard some talk of a Tarly host refusing to bow to a rumored abomination near Horn Hill. The Tarlys have always been proud, Cersei said, a note of derision creeping into her tone. But with Randall Tarly dead and his son, what's the fool's name? Samwell. Missing somewhere in the Watch or the Citadel, the Tarlys lack strong leadership. They will come to heel or they will break. See to it. Qyburn masked his flicker of intrigue behind a polite nod. Samwell Tarly had once studied at the Citadel. If anyone outside the realm of black magic might have an inkling about Qyburn's methods, it would be a man who read widely. Yes, Your Grace, he replied. I'll ensure that region is handled. Satisfied, Cersei set her goblet down with an audible click on the table. Do so. One more matter. Her eyes narrowed. The small folk whisper of a child disappearing near the Blackwater. They say your men took her. Tell me truthfully. Did you? Qyburn kept his face carefully neutral. In truth, his operations required any number of test subjects, not all of them noble-born. But he never liked to dwell on the details. I fear that rumor might be a fabrication. I have no need for a child in my experiments, Your Grace. I only require those of noble blood or specialized knowledge. She studied him, suspicious. Then ensure no such rumor persists. If word spreads that children are being taken, we risk igniting a fury among the small folk that even fear can't stifle. I won't have another riot in my streets. I understand, Qyburn said smoothly. I shall dispatch men to investigate the rumor and stifle it. Good. She turned back to the window, her posture dismissive. You may go. He bowed low and withdrew. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, leaving Cersei in a hush of flickering candlelight. Qyburn headed for the hidden passage once more, thoughts whirling. The Tarly region had become a source of friction. The North had begun to quietly resist, and talk of missing children, even if it were a mere rumor, had clearly struck a nerve with the Queen. All of it threatened his grand design if not carefully addressed. Descending again into the depths, he reflected on how far his reach already extended. Newly minted monstrous lords in the Riverlands, a silent infiltration of the Westerlands, hush-hush expansions in the Reach, even secret agents in the Vale. But the realm was vast, and there were always corners not yet subdued. If Qyburn's abominations could be so thoroughly destroyed, as in Moat Cailin, it meant certain holdouts were learning how to fight back. He emerged in his laboratory, where Allard Brax and the others watched over the newest creation. The man lay on the slab, no longer thrashing but breathing shallowly, eyes unfocused. Qyburn moved to the table where a cluster of vials awaited. Each contained a different concoction. The blackish fluid distilled from white remains, a purple serum rumored to have come from a warlock's cache in Karth, and a pale blue tincture that bubbled with faint luminescence whenever the temperature in the room shifted. Carefully, he measured out precise droplets into a fresh bowl, stirring until the mixture hissed with a pungent vapor. I need more from you, he said abruptly, addressing the silent lords who stood at attention. Our hold in the realm is secure but not absolute. There are pockets of defiance, and we cannot allow them to spread. I will be dispatching you to various locations, some of you in the Westerlands, some in the Reach, a few heading north. Each of you must act as the Crown's enforcer. Where you find sabotage, quell it. Where you find rumors, stifle them. Allard bowed his head. Yes, Master, but what of the new transformations? Do you require us here to guard the process? Qyburn considered. I have enough loyal subjects to maintain the pipeline of recruits. My spells have grown stronger. What I lack is a universal deterrent to hush the realm. So we must remind them, house by house, that defiance is not tolerated. The others nodded with eerie unanimity. Qyburn regarded the row of stoic faces and felt a strange mixture of pride and discomfort. They resembled men but moved like automatons, each suppressed while hidden beneath layered hexes and potions. On nights like this, he almost preferred them mindless, like walking corpses, but he required their cunning. A mere brute could not navigate the intricacies of political warfare. He turned back to the newly transformed man on the slab, whose eyes roved with dull anxiety. "Rise," Qyburn commanded, lacing his voice with just enough force that the runes on the floor flickered. The man groaned, but did as instructed, pushing himself upright. His breath rattled in his lungs, and the chain on his left wrist clinked as it fell away. Qyburn observed the scars where incisions and arcane inscriptions had seared the flesh. "Do you know your name?" The man's lips parted hesitantly. Arnulf, Ser Arnulf Coldwater, from the Vale." "Not anymore," Qyburn replied, the same gentle finality he had used 1,000 times. "You serve the crown. You belong to me. Do you understand?" Ser Arnulf's eyes flickered with that silver sheen. "Yes, I belong to the crown." "Good. Then rest. You will have duties soon." Qyburn turned from him, letting a pair of other abominations lead the new recruit away. He had little interest in pleasantries or personal histories. In Qyburn's world, a man was no more than the sum of his potential uses. A short while later, the bulk of the laboratory fell quiet. Qyburn passed among the tables, each bearing evidence of ongoing or half-finished experiments. Jars of pickled organs, twisted lumps of flesh suspended in tinted fluid, half-complete diagrams scrawled with Valyrian glyphs. Tonight, though, his mind was too preoccupied to delve into fresh study. The threat from the north gnawed at him. If a ragtag band of Karstarks or their allies could slay one of his best, what else might lurk beyond the boundaries of knowledge? He mentally listed the known ways to kill his creations. He had woven protective spells, introduced necromantic components, and anchored loyalty in runes etched into their very bones. Yet old magic, particularly that tied to weirwoods or the children of the forest, had an unpredictable potency. There were also rumors that dragonglass, obsidian, held strange power against wights, though Qyburn's spawn were not entirely wights. Still, the principle was similar enough to worry him. At last, he withdrew to a small chamber that functioned as his private study. There, behind a locked iron door, he kept the books too dangerous or volatile for prying eyes. Ancient scrolls from As-High, a single volume of the Death of Dragons penned in the latter days of Valyria, and half-rotted manuscripts from unknown corners of Essos. He sat at a narrow table, opening a tome bound in black leather. Its pages described hybrid necromancies, referencing certain reptilian bloodlines that once roamed Sithorios. The text hinted at forging near-immortal guardians by splicing bestial essence with human flesh. He grimaced as he read. Many passages were incomplete, the text eaten away by damp or time, but the gist was there. If Qyburn spliced his next generation of monstrous lords with something older, something that bridged the boundary between mortal and monstrous, he might create unstoppable watchers immune to old gods' magic. Yet that meant obtaining a rare form of blood or essence, presumably from an extinct creature. Dragons were effectively gone, save for rumors drifting across the narrow sea about one or two last survivors. The Basilisk Isles in Sithorios allegedly housed monstrous reptiles, but that was half a world away, and Qyburn lacked the time or resources to mount such an expedition. A faint pang of frustration pulsed behind his eyes. He closed the tome, leaning back in his chair. How far could he push this? How many more nights must he sacrifice to ensure the realm bowed to the crown's monstrous sword arm? He glanced at a flickering candle. The flame seemed to dance with hidden colors, a trick of the eyes or the presence of residual magic. Qyburn held his gaze on it, letting his mind drift into the swirling possibilities. He had options. He could press deeper into the lore of the White Walkers from beyond the wall, rumored to command dead things. But that was a risky route, one that might invite powers even he could not control. He could attempt to harness the Red Priest's flame-based magic, but they were notoriously secretive and fanatical about their own god, Lawler. Or he could remain with the savage blend of potions and necromancy he had perfected, ensuring that the realm did not unite against him in one unstoppable wave. At length, he rose and left the book-laden room, stepping back into the main lab. It was nearly dawn now. Even beneath the keep, he could sense time's passage. The next day promised fresh tasks, dealing with the Tarly friction, dispatching monstrous lords to quell rumor-mongers in the city, and ensuring the Queen's peace. He allowed himself a final glance at the runic slab, stained with the fresh blood of Ser Arnulf, and then retired to rest. High above, as morning light sliced across King's Landing, the city stirred. Fishermen carted their night's haul through the streets, bakers fired their ovens, merchants hollered for attention in the markets. If they heard any strangled moans drifting from the Red Keep's subterranean cells, they paid it no mind. Survival meant minding one's own business in these times, especially when each day brought new stories of monstrous knights loyal to the Queen. But the undercurrents of fear had ripened into something else in the countryside. In the villages just beyond the city walls, small gatherings of commoners spoke of the Crown's madness, of knights disturbed by men with glowing eyes, of entire families gone missing. They had heard talk of a secret band of rebels forming in the Stormlands, hedge knights, former sellswords, even some disillusioned lesser nobles who avoided Qyburn's snares. In whispered hushes, they called these rebels the Free Knights or Ghosts of the Storm. A romantic name for a group probably no bigger than a few dozen, yet rumor endowed them with near-mythic status. Supposedly, they carried old charms and prayed to both the Seven and the old gods alike, forging alliances with anyone who sought an end to unnatural rule. Of course, Qyburn's network of spies kept watch on such rumors. The name Ghosts of the Storm was scrawled in the ledgers of half a dozen monstrous lords, each of whom intended to track down and stamp out these upstarts. Yet the group's nature made it elusive. It was not one single army, but a shifting array of hidden camps. They communicated via coded letters, seldom staying in one place long enough for Qyburn's brood to catch them. And though their numbers seemed small, Qyburn suspected they had powerful backers, perhaps even some from across the sea, or a surviving handful of dissident red priests and ex-maesters. He took breakfast alone, as was his wont, in a narrow alcove overlooking a courtyard within the Red Keep. The courtyard was deserted but for a handful of servants hurriedly preparing for the day's chores. Qyburn sipped a cup of watered wine, nibbling on bread, letting his mind race ahead to the tasks. He had dispatched 2 monstrous lords to Horn Hill the night before, each claiming to represent the Crown's authority. They would gauge the Tarly holdout. If it turned into open conflict, Qyburn relished the thought of reinforcing them with more abominations. Let them see what it meant to defy Cersei Lannister. He had also sent a pair of his earliest successes, men from the Westerlands, cunning and cold, northward, to glean more information about the Karstark region. Let them dig up whatever knowledge had allowed those rebels to kill an abomination. Then he would replicate it or stamp it out. Qyburn thrived on secrets. Knowledge was his currency. If the old ways could destroy his brood, then mastering or negating those ways became his highest priority. His meal done, he rose. By mid-morning, he was in the bowels of the keep again, supervising new transformations. 2 men who had once been landed knights in the Crownlands were strapped to separate slabs. They had fought a drunken brawl in a tavern, unwisely boasting that no half-dead fiend would intimidate them. A city watchman loyal to the Queen reported their outburst, and Qyburn deemed them excellent fodder for his expansions. With quiet efficiency, he oversaw the incantations, the incisions, the injection of potions that set their veins aflame. Their screams lanced the darkness until they gave way to shuddering silence. By noon, they were pinned under Qyburn's unholy spells, eyes glazed with fresh devotion. He pushed aside the lumps of discarded flesh, unlucky bits that had outlived their use, and sent the new abominations to convalesce in the adjoining cell. It was a gruesome routine, but by now it felt as mundane to him as a blacksmith hammering hot iron. Each day, a new batch of iron was delivered, and each day he shaped it into blades. Throughout King's Landing, That day passed like many others under the Lannister crown. Gold cloaks patrolled the streets, admonishing petty thieves. Shops opened, their owners wearing strained smiles. Courtiers and sycophants tried to curry favor with those close to the queen. No one openly spoke of the horrors happening below, but a hush of superstition settled over the populace. If, by chance, a merchant recognized a reanimated noble by the unnatural glow in his eyes, the merchant bowed quickly, avoiding all questions of the man's whereabouts or rumored demise. Safer not to know. Yet in the Stormlands, away from the Queen's watch, the seeds of rebellion sprouted. A battered knight calling himself Ser Joss of the Weeping Tower met with a handful of fellow renegades in the ruins of a once proud holdfast. Maps lay spread on a mossy table, pinned in place by rocks. A single tallow candle flickered even in daylight, for the keep's roof had half collapsed, creating a swirl of dusty gloom. "We cannot challenge them head-on," Ser Joss said, voice hoarse from nights of watchful vigilance. He pointed to the map with a dagger. "If we do, a handful of those silver-eyed devils could tear us apart. We need cunning, and we need to find the key to undoing Qyburn's spells." A younger knight, stubble covering a gaunt face, muttered, "I heard they can be killed if you take their heads, or if you burn them, but they heal so quickly, it's hard to land a blow. There's rumor that obsidian can cripple them, like the whites, but we have so little of that." Ser Joss nodded gravely. "We do, but we do have something else." He glanced at a figure wrapped in a dark cloak, standing silently at the edges of the group. "Show them, my lady." The cloaked figure lifted slender hands, drawing back the hood to reveal a woman with sharp green eyes and a livid scar across one cheek. She set her jaw. "I am Lady Alice Karstark," she said, voice steady with a northern lilt. "One of Qyburn's brutes murdered my cousin near the last river, but we learned from the body it left behind." From a leather pouch, she withdrew a small, twisted trinket, a chunk of bone inscribed with dark runes. This was embedded in the creature's chest. "We found it after we managed to drive a spear of dragonglass through its back. The runes glowed with an unholy light until we pried the bone free. Then the abomination collapsed, the blackness leaking from its eyes." The knights crowded closer, faces drawn with mingled horror and curiosity. "So that's what animates them," one breathed, gaze fixed on the bone. "Some sort of dark talisman?" Lady Alice nodded. "It seems so. Possibly each abomination has one. If we can break that piece or remove it, they die like any other corpse." A hush followed. Ser Joss exhaled. "But how to get close enough? Even in groups, they're lethal. And we can't very well roam the countryside examining the chests of every suspicious noble." "We'll need infiltration," said Lady Alice. "Perhaps find an abomination who wavers or one of Qyburn's lesser men who might sell secrets for gold. We learn how and where these talismans are implanted. Then we devise a plan. If we can replicate the tactic, we could strike them at multiple keeps, cripple Qyburn's entire network." She paused, glancing around at the men. "But know this, he has watchers everywhere. If we fail, we might doom all the free knights, and quite possibly the rest of Westeros." A tense murmur rippled through the group, but no one flinched. Their cause, though perilous, stood as the only bulwark against the creeping tyranny that threatened to devour the realm. One man, older and grizzled, put a hand over his heart. "The realm was not always kind to me," he said, voice low. "But better a flawed realm than a realm ruled by necromancy." The others solemnly agreed. Thus, a plan began to form, to gather knowledge of Qyburn's process in detail, to sabotage it from within, and to muster a force armed with enough old magic or dragonglass weaponry to fell these creatures. They would need cunning, subterfuge, and luck. For now, they scattered into smaller groups to avoid detection, each tasked with recruiting more allies or unearthing more intelligence. Lady Alice Karstark, accompanied by a loyal retinue of Northmen, headed east to parley with rumored sympathizers in the Vale. Ser Joss traveled west, hoping to find hidden stashes of dragonglass or an ally in the crumbling castle of a lesser Stormlands house. Step by step, the seeds of a broader rebellion took root. Far from those clandestine ruins, Qyburn paced his laboratory with growing disquiet. Word had just arrived by Raven that 2 of his monstrous lords, dispatched to Horn Hill, had met with an unexpected confrontation. The Tarly men had refused to bow, and one abomination was severely injured, forced to retreat. The blow to Qyburn's pride stung more than the physical damage. If local forces, untrained in magic, could wound one of his creations, it meant the realm was learning. He penned a quick note to the Queen, explaining that he would handle the Tarly problem personally. As the day stretched into late afternoon, he had the battered abomination brought before him. Its left arm was nearly severed, black ichor dripping from where the flesh had split. The face, once that of a minor Westerland's lord, was contorted with an animalistic snarl, the silver glow in its eyes flickering. Qyburn observed it with cold detachment. "You failed me," he said quietly. The creature hissed, voice reduced to a guttural rasp. "They had archers. They used arrows drenched in wildfire. It burned us from the inside. I barely escaped." Qyburn's brow furrowed. Wildfire. Clever. Expensive to procure, but Tarly discipline must have taught them to aim well. He raised a small black dagger etched with runes. "Hold still." The abomination fell silent under the compulsion of Qyburn's voice. With clinical efficiency, Qyburn probed the wound, humming as he studied the severed flesh. He traced the lines of runic script etched into the bone. Yes, there was the small talisman fused to the radius. He noted the half-melted edges. Fire had undone much of his artistry. Gently, he pressed the tip of the dagger against the bone. He murmured a short incantation. A sickly green glow seeped into the abomination's limb, encouraging the flesh to knit together. The creature's body responded in convulsive twitches, the rent muscle and sinew crawling back into alignment like worms stirred from damp earth. Soon the black blood ceased dripping. Qyburn let out a satisfied exhale. "Can you move your arm?" The abomination lifted its limb, rotating it slowly. "Yes, master," it said, though pain lingered in its expression. "Then you will return to Horn Hill with reinforcements." Qyburn gestured, and a pair of newly minted lords stepped forward. One had been a loyal retainer in House Hayford before Qyburn's procedures. The other hailed from the Vale. Both possessed the cold, predatory stance of seasoned abominations. "Burn the Tarly crops, starve them out if you must. If they refuse to kneel, they will pay with their lives." His eyes gleamed. "Leave none who resist, and seize any who might be of strategic use in my future work." The injured abomination bowed, black-laced saliva flecking its lips. "It will be done." They left soon after, the echo of their footsteps trailing through the corridors until the dungeons fell silent again. Qyburn turned to a table laden with half-burned scrolls detailing old Targaryen warfare tactics. The Targaryens had once used dragons and wildfire to devastate entire regions. He could do the same on a smaller scale if needed, but he preferred more subtle methods. Still, if the Tarlys and others continued to defy him, subtlety might have to be cast aside. That night, beneath a sky strewn with uneasy stars, the abominations traveled with preternatural speed toward the Reach. They carried only minimal supplies, for their bodies needed little sustenance in the conventional sense. By contrast, in the Stormlands, Lady Alice Karstark and Ser Joss's separate parties trekked onward, forging quiet alliances with discontented lords. In the Vale, a rumor spread that the rightful heir to House Arryn sought answers about lords returning with silver eyes. Everywhere the crown's monstrous shadow reached, small flickers of resistance flared, though none yet strong enough to challenge the entire system Qyburn had built. And in King's Landing, a gloom settled over Cersei's court. Servants whispered of ominous dreams, of shadows flitting through corridors at night. Some claimed they heard chanting in an unknown tongue, though no culprit was ever found. The Queen's retinue included more and more silent lords with the faint gleam in their eyes, a fact that made visiting dignitaries from across the sea distinctly uneasy, though they seldom voiced it. The extravagance of feasts persisted, but laughter felt strained, weighed down by an atmosphere of hidden threat. Qyburn attended one such feast in the Great Hall. slipping into a seat near the dais where Cersei presided over the affair. Distant music played from hired minstrels, but the air was thick with tension. A handful of notable families from the Riverlands, including House Mutant and House Derry, had arrived for an audience. They wore forced smiles, uneasy about the rumors swirling around the Red Keep. One lord, a barrel-chested man with graying hair, ventured a tentative remark about how quiet the keep seemed at night, how few guards patrolled openly. Cersei merely shrugged, claiming that her reign was so secure she needed fewer men to maintain order. Qyburn, listening closely, detected the quiver in the man's voice. He wondered whether the rumor mill had already told him that many of those guards had gone missing, transformed, imprisoned, or killed. Midway through the feast, as servants ladled thick stew into pewter bowls, a messenger arrived. The room grew still, eyes turning to see who would breach the queen's dinner. The man, a dusty envoy in Lannister colors, bowed low and spoke in hushed tones to Cersei's ear. Qyburn watched as the queen's face hardened. Abruptly, she stood. "Lord Derry, Lord Mutant," she said, voice echoing in the hush. "Your business here must wait until tomorrow. I have pressing matters of the realm to attend to." She swept out, and Qyburn followed in her wake. Together, they strode through corridors until they reached a private room off the main hall. Only when the door closed did Cersei let her composure slip. Her cheeks were flushed, and anger flashed in her eyes. "The Free Knights," she spat, as though the words left a bitter taste. "They struck in the Crownlands near Rosby's lands. A band of them ambushed and killed one of your creations. Again, they're spreading, Qyburn. We have to crush them." Qyburn crossed his arms, concealing his flicker of surprise. Another abomination destroyed? That was more than coincidence. How did they succeed? The messenger said they used a combination of wildfire arrows and, apparently, a blade of dragonglass to finish the job once it was wounded. Cersei looked at him accusingly. "You assured me your creatures could withstand ordinary assault." "They can," Qyburn replied, voice tight. "But wildfire is no ordinary assault, and dragonglass is known to hamper undead or partially undead flesh. My transformations are more robust than White's, but similarities remain." He took a measured breath. "If the Free Knights are learning these methods, it means we face an organized effort, not random pockets of defiance. They must have a source of knowledge and resources." Cersei's jaw set. "Then we'll hunt them down. Every last one. I want you to send your best to root them out, and if that means raising a few hamlets along the way, so be it." Qyburn hesitated. He knew that widespread slaughter would stoke the realm's fury, but he also recognized the queen's determination. "As you wish, your grace," he said, inclining his head. "However, might I suggest a two-pronged approach? While some of my lords hunt them openly, others should infiltrate their ranks in disguise. The easiest way to kill a weed is to strike at the root." Cersei's lips curved into a cold smile. "Yes, do it. Spare no expense. I want them paralyzed by fear or wiped from existence." With that, she whirled, leaving Qyburn in the hush of the private room. He stood for a long moment thinking, how had the rebels organized so effectively, so quickly? The short answer: they must have discovered the link between his abominations and the vulnerabilities inherent in them. Likely they had some relic or knowledge gleaned from a partial kill. He pressed his tongue against the inside of his cheek, considering the best next step. He would not lose the advantage he had fought so viciously to create. Back in his laboratory that night, he gathered 3 of his most cunning abominations, the first being Allard Brax, the second a former sworn sword of House Swan in the Stormlands, and the third a Vale Lord rumored to have once been a fearsome tourney knight. Each had proven capable of blending with the living, retaining enough personality to fool unsuspecting eyes. They knelt before him in the flickering torchlight, the silver sheen in their irises catching every stray glimmer. "You are to embed yourselves among these so-called Free Knights," Qyburn said. "Pretend disillusionment with the crown. Perhaps say you fled upon witnessing atrocities in the Red Keep. Use any ruse you must. Our goal is to learn where they gather, who leads them, and how they plan to fight us. Once you have that knowledge, send word. Then we shall break them. Allard spoke first. Yes, master. And if they test us somehow? If they suspect we're tainted? You have your instructions, Qyburn replied, voice icy. You know how to feign human warmth. You can even starve yourselves or pretend to fear if it helps the facade. But do not fail me. Should they grow suspicious, kill them quietly if you can, or retreat. The queen is done with half measures. The three bowed, then slipped away into the darkness. Qyburn watched their departure, a flicker of unease gnawing at him. Deception was second nature to him, but he had rarely demanded such infiltration. The risk that one might break free or be unmasked was significant. Still, success would cripple the rebellion more thoroughly than 1,000 swords. He needed that victory to preserve the illusions of unstoppable might. Sunrise the following morning brought a swirl of fresh crises. Ravens arrived from the Westerlands. Sightings of monstrous lords had sparked small riots in Lannisport, though local forces had stamped them out. A letter from the Citadel, frighteningly polite, requested an audience with the Queen regarding disturbing rumors of necromantic malpractices. Qyburn sneered at the parchment, recalling how the maesters had exiled him. The Citadel was too deep in its tradition-bound arrogance to mount a real threat, but it was yet another weed demanding attention. Cersei had no patience for maesters. She ordered Qyburn to pen a curt reply, stating that the crown would receive no uninvited inspection. In truth, Qyburn supported that stance. If the Citadel was allowed to snoop too deeply, they might discover more secrets than Qyburn could afford. A confrontation with the maesters felt inevitable one day, but not yet. He sealed the letter with Cersei's lion sigil, dispatching it with a sour smile. Thus did the labyrinthine dance of power continue. Day by day, Qyburn's brood extended its hidden tendrils across Westeros, even as new pockets of resistance flared. The battles played out in silent corridors, on lonely roads, in shadowed glens. A half-dozen monstrous lords might arrive at a minor keep, subdue the local lord or replace him if needed, and suborn his banners to the crown. Meanwhile, in some distant tavern, a battered knight or escaped captive told grisly tales of abominations with shimmering eyes, fueling the resolve of those who resisted. Ravens darted across the skies with coded messages, while swords clashed in back alleys and seldom-traveled passes. Within King's Landing, the tension was palpable. The City Watch turned a blind eye to any commotion involving the Queen's special enforcers. Whispers of the Walking Dead or silver-eyed devils abounded. There were no direct uprisings in the city, but an air of quiet desperation lingered among the small folk. Fear pinned them down more effectively than iron chains. If any talk of rebellion arose, it was shared in the hush of hidden corners, never at the open marketplace. In the Red Keep, Qyburn meticulously penned a tome of his findings, half in code, half in arcane glyphs. Even if someone stole it, deciphering the script would demand knowledge beyond any living maester. He described each new iteration of the transformation, noting how best to fuse runes into living bone, how to weave spells that suppressed rebellious urges, and how to enhance physical prowess without making the subject so savage as to be uncontrollable. It was, in his mind, a masterpiece of forbidden lore. If only the Citadel could see him now, recognized as the preeminent scholar of the black arts they had once scorned. But that moment of triumph was overshadowed by the intangible sense that his dominion was under siege from all sides. Even as he wrote, there came a thunderous pounding on his laboratory door. He rose, frowning. One of his monstrous lords, a gaunt figure from the Stormlands, staggered inside, half collapsing at Qyburn's feet. The creature clutched its left side, black blood seeping between its fingers. "Master," it rasped. "I've been attacked." Qyburn knelt. "By whom?" A group on the Rosby Road. They claimed to follow a northern lady. She had a spear carved of weirwood and tipped with dragonglass. It burned. It burned me when it struck. A rattling breath. I killed 2 of them, but she escaped. Qyburn ground his teeth. The name Lady Alice Karstark flitted through his mind. She was rumored to have traveled south. Could she have come so far, so swiftly? He forced the abomination to lie on a nearby table, ignoring its wince of pain. Gently, he peeled back the torn clothing, revealing a scorched hole near the ribcage. The runic inscriptions that decorated the bone were badly damaged. He scrambled to gather a series of potions. Each was meant to reinforce failing magical sigils. A swirl of black fluid, a dab of pale green salve that hissed upon contact with blood, and a whispered incantation. The creature thrashed, eyes rolled back, but Qyburn pressed on, determined to salvage the runes. If the bone talisman was ruined entirely, the abomination would be worthless. More than that, each fallen creature taught the rebels new tricks. After a tense quarter hour, the wound began to mend. The runes regained a fraction of their glow, though faint. The abomination's breathing steadied. Qyburn let out a slow exhale, stepping back. "You'll survive," he said quietly. "But your integrity is compromised. You're less stable now." "Master, I beg your forgiveness," the creature groaned. "You have it," Qyburn replied, though his voice was emotionless. "But from now on, you remain in the Red Keep. Serve as a guard. I can't have you out in the field, risking capture or destruction." A thought sparked. "In fact, your presence here might be useful." "Of course, Master." Qyburn waved over a pair of attendants, human servants, terrified but loyal by necessity. They hoisted the abomination off the table and carried it to a secluded alcove. Qyburn closed his eyes for a moment, exasperated. Another blow from these rebels. They were like rats, gnawing at the edges of the crown's fortress. He needed a decisive gambit soon. At that moment, a mental shift occurred. He recalled the final pages of that black tome in his private study, the mentions of forging near-immortal guardians by splicing monstrous bloodlines from outside Westeros. If, somehow, he could replicate the strength of dragons or some other legendary beast, maybe the next wave of abominations would be impervious to dragonglass or wildfire. He had dismissed it before as too ambitious. But if these rebels kept finding ways to kill his brood, bold measures might be the only path forward. His plan began to take shape. Perhaps he could glean the secret of Daenerys Targaryen's dragons, if any of them still lived. Rumor said the Dragon Queen had soared east after certain conflicts, or that she had died. Information was scattered, contradictory. Another possibility was capturing some exotic creature from Sithorios or the Basilisk Isles, but that might require a voyage Qyburn had no time to make. He could also attempt harnessing the blood of the mountain, that unstoppable brute, though Gregor Clegane's body was already an amalgam of vile substances. The mountain walked as Ser Robert Strong in the Red Keep, silent and menacing. Qyburn had resurrected him, but that was child's play compared to forging a fully hybrid breed. Still, the concept teased him an irresistible lure. If he could create even a handful of truly invulnerable guardians, unstoppable by mortal means, the rebellion would be crushed, and Cersei's throne would stand unchallenged. Yes, he thought, eyes gleaming with renewed fervor. I must push the limits once more. That same night, while Qyburn pored over ancient references and scrawled half-mad notes, his infiltration team set forth across the realm. Allard Brax, disguised with a shabby cloak and a mild manner, roamed the dusty roads of the Stormlands. His silver eyes were hidden beneath a broad hood. Now and then, he traveled with farmhands or joined ragged sellswords, offering them coin in exchange for rumor. Eventually, he heard talk of the ghosts of the storm and pressed further, claiming he sought refuge from the crown's cruelty. He even gave a false name, Ser Holland from the Westerlands, on the run for refusing an unjust order. His stoic gaze and subdued manner made the ruse plausible. Before long, word reached the local cells of Free Knights, and they arranged a secret meeting. Allard arrived at a small clearing beneath towering oak trees, greeted by two hedge knights wearing mismatched armor. Moonlight glimmered through the canopy, revealing the suspicious glances they cast him. "You claim to have fled from Qyburn's abominations?" one knight demanded. Allard nodded gravely, feigning a tremor in his voice. I saw what they did to my companions, turned them into living nightmares. I couldn't stomach it. I barely escaped." The hedge knights studied him. One stepped closer, peering under the hood. "Show me your eyes," Allard mentally cursed, but he had prepared. He extracted a small vial from his belt, letting a single droplet fall onto his tongue. It was a solution Qyburn had concocted, temporarily dulling the silver glow for a span of hours. He parted his eyelids fully, and though his gaze was intense, there was no monstrous shine. The knights relaxed a fraction. "Very well," the first knight said. "We'll take you to our captain. But if you try anything—" Allard forced a nervous smile. "I understand." They led him through a winding path, along hidden game trails, until they reached an old watchtower in disrepair, half ensnared by creeping vines. Fires flickered within, forming silhouettes against the broken windows. Inside, a dozen rough-looking men and women gathered, wearing the grim expressions of those who fought a losing war. At their center stood a woman in battered plate mail. Her hair was dark, her features sharp with silent resolve. Lady Cassandra Swan, if Allard recalled correctly, a lesser cousin to the main Swan line, but rumored to have turned renegade after Qyburn seized her elder brother for transformation. She watched Allard approach with a guarded stare. "You claim to hate Qyburn's devils as much as we do," she said. "Prove it. Tell us something of use." Allard had prepared a carefully spun story. He shared half-truths about the Red Keep, naming lesser-known corridors where he alleged Qyburn held captives. To bolster his credibility, he offered details gleaned from Qyburn's own notes, though carefully curated so as not to endanger real assets. After he spoke, the group murmured among themselves. A few seemed impressed, others suspicious. Lady Cassandra weighed his words. "If all this is true, we might rescue people from the keep. But that place is a fortress." Allard shrugged, forcing a note of bitterness into his tone. "It's the only chance. We can't fight them in open battle. We have to nibble at Qyburn's edges. Freeing captives would be a victory for morale. And if we find proof of the Atrocit, there we can rally more houses." A flicker of hope lit the group. One older hedge knight said, "If we could do that, the lords might join us openly. The realm might rise." Cassandra glanced around. "We'd need stealth, and we'd need inside knowledge of the keep's guard rotations." Allard bowed slightly. "I can provide that, my lady, if you'll have me. I'd only ask you trust me enough to let me fight at your side. I want vengeance on Qyburn's monsters for what they did to my friends." She studied him for a long moment. "You speak well, Sir Holland, but trust is earned. You'll remain under watch for now." Allard nodded. Internally, he felt a chill sense of triumph. He was weaving himself deeper into the rebels' plan, ensuring Qyburn would know every move they intended. His next step was to glean the location of their leaders, like Lady Alice Karstark, if she was indeed near. Then, once he had enough information, he would summon reinforcements to slaughter them or sabotage their best-laid schemes. Meanwhile, in the Vale, the other infiltration agents attempted similar tactics. Some found only scattered cells, but others stumbled upon well-hidden networks of watchful lords and free riders. The rebels were not centralized enough to be easily toppled in one strike. That fact frustrated Qyburn, who, every few days, awaited coded reports from his infiltration team with increasing impatience. Each day without progress was another day the rebellion could grow bolder. The tension across Westeros mounted, like an overfull wineskin ready to burst. In the Westerlands, a newly minted abomination forcibly took up residence in a lesser Lannister vassal's keep, prompting half the local peasantry to flee. In the Reach, the Tarly standoff continued, with the abominations skirmishing along the borders of Horn Hill. Rivers of trade dried up in certain areas, leading to hunger and discontent. Every rumor of defiance or monstrous cruelty fueled the fires of civil unrest. All the while, Qyburn clung to his dream of forging an unassailable new breed, something that could laugh off dragonglass, wildfire, or weirwood spears. He pored over the dark tomes each night, searching for a key. Sometimes, in the flickering candlelight, he thought he glimpsed monstrous silhouettes lurking at the edge of his vision, figments of his imagination, or perhaps the side effects of meddling with cosmic forces. He brushed them aside, forcing his mind to remain on the texts. He would not falter. Power demanded sacrifice. Days slipped into weeks. The Stormland's infiltration advanced. Allard Brax secretly fed intelligence to the Red Keep, using coded ravens dispatched under cover of darkness. Each message was short and precise, naming rebel hideouts, planned raids, or noteworthy leaders. On Qyburn's orders, monstrous lords moved to intercept these pockets, leading to bloody skirmishes in moonlit forests and on lonely roads. Sometimes the abominations succeeded, exterminating entire cells. But sometimes the rebels vanished just in time, as if forewarned. Their cunning suggested a level of coordination Qyburn found worrisome. He suspected there might be a spy in his infiltration team, or perhaps a hidden ally among the abominations who had found a way to break free. Nonetheless, the crown steadily gained ground. Abominations crushed multiple attempts at forming a cohesive rebel army in the Stormlands. Villages that hosted rebel sympathizers were torched as a warning to others. Bits and pieces of the rebellion splintered, forcing them deeper underground. Lady Cassana Swan's watchtower was overrun when a monstrous strike force arrived at dawn. She narrowly escaped. She regrouped with Lady Alice Karstark, forging a new plan with the handful of survivors. They retreated into the mountains near the Vale border, seeking the rumored help of House Royce or other Vale lords suspicious of the crown's unholy power. In the Red Keep, Cersei exulted at each new victory, certain the rebellion would die soon. She paraded her monstrous lords at court, holding small ceremonies where they pledged oaths of loyalty. It was a grotesque spectacle. These once proud nobles, now bound in silence and black devotion, kneeling at Cersei's feet. She basked in the fear it elicited from visiting dignitaries, counting it as a triumph. Still, Qyburn harbored doubts. Open confrontation favored his brood, but these rebels persisted. If they managed to piece together a single decisive blow against the crown, it could unravel everything. The infiltration was working, but not fast enough, and the rebels had found or devised ways to kill his children. He needed a masterstroke, either the final destruction of their leadership or an unstoppable wave of new abominations. At last, the opportunity arose. One of Qyburn's infiltration agents in the Vale sent word that several rebel leaders planned a secret council at a mountain fortress reputed to be half in ruins, once held by a lesser branch of House Royce. This fortress, called Grey Watch, was nearly inaccessible, perched on a steep crag above a river gorge. The rebels intended to meet at midnight under cover of darkness, hoping the vantage point would protect them. But Qyburn's agent learned the route they would take and the watch signals used. When Qyburn shared the intelligence with Cersei, she was elated. "Wipe them out in one stroke," she commanded. "Send as many abominations as needed. Burn the fortress to ash if you must. I will not abide these gnats." Qyburn bowed. "I'll go personally to oversee it. With your leave, your grace, I can ensure we gather valuable test subjects among their ranks before finishing them off. Some might be quite informative." A cold grin curved her lips. "Yes, make sure no one escapes." That night, as storms gathered over the Vale, Qyburn departed King's Landing in secrecy, accompanied by a contingent of his mightiest abominations, including the partially repaired one from the Stormlands. They traveled with uncanny speed, aiming to reach the mountains before the rebel council concluded. If fortune favored them, they would catch Lady Alice Karstark, Lady Cassana Swan, perhaps even other influential figures. With them gone, the rebellion's back would be broken. Wind howled over steep mountain passes, whipping at Qyburn's cloak as he led his group along a narrow trail. Above, jagged peaks stabbed into a sky laden with thunderclouds. A single cart rattled behind them, driven by one of Qyburn's lesser thralls, a pale-faced man who never spoke. Qyburn had stocked the cart with vials of potent alchemical fire and a cache of dragonglass arrowheads stolen from the rebels in earlier skirmishes. He intended to use their own weapons if it suited him, or destroy them so they could not be turned against his brood. The path rose higher, then widened into a plateau. There, across a rickety bridge, sat Grey Watch, a looming structure half-choked by ivy. Towers, some collapsed, jutted against the sky. A flicker of light glowed in one window, betraying occupancy. Qyburn halted, raising a hand. The abominations gathered behind him, silent and poised. Each wore partial armor fitted over their twisted bodies, runes etched into the metal for additional reinforcement. "We'll spread out," Qyburn said, voice low. "Brax, you and 2 others circle around to block the main exit. The rest of you come with me across the bridge. We'll signal each other with lantern flashes once we're in position. Then we strike." Allard Brax bowed, his face a mask of calm. He led 2 abominations along a lower ridge, disappearing behind a tumble of boulders. Qyburn waited until the distant flicker of a lantern told him they were ready. He advanced, crossing the swaying bridge with sure-footed steps. Wind hissed around them, thunder rumbled overhead. The fortress gate was half-rotted, easy to pry open if needed. Qyburn slipped inside the courtyard. No sign of sentries. Clearly the rebels relied on the fortress's remote location for defense. A faint murmur of voices led him to the main hall, where flickering torchlights spilled through a gap in the weathered doors. He peered around the corner. More than 24 figures stood near a crumbling dais. Men and women in patched armor, some wearing northern furs, others the simpler linens of the Vale. At the center, Lady Alice Karstark, tall and cold-eyed, argued with Lady Cassana Swan over the next move. Scattered among them were a few seasoned knights, their arms folded, listening grimly. Qyburn's lips curled. So many gathered in one place. This was indeed a grand opportunity. He waved a hand in silent command. The abominations behind him readied themselves. One pressed an ear to the wind, sniffing for any hidden watchers. Another unslung a short crossbow loaded with a specialized bolt. The bolt had runes etched into the shaft, the broadhead dipped in a lethal admixture that paralyzed living flesh, a new experiment of Qyburn's. If they could fell the leading rebels without an alarm, they might capture them alive. He signaled, counting silently, 1, 2, 3. The crossbow twanged. The bolt whipped into the hall. It struck a man near the dais, burying itself in his side. He gasped, staggering. In seconds, the poison took effect, and he toppled, wide-eyed, to the floor. The rebels cried out, scattering for cover. Immediately, Qyburn's abominations poured through the door, weapons raised. Qyburn himself advanced in their wake, chanting under his breath. Torches flared with sudden brilliance as his incantation seized control of the flame, creating a moment of stark illumination that cast monstrous shadows on the walls. Lady Cassana Swan reacted swiftly, drawing a sword and barking orders. A pair of rebels loosed arrows, but the abominations charged through, ignoring minor wounds. One rebel tried to hurl a container of wildfire, but an abomination lunged, batting it away. The container shattered against a stone column, bursting into green flames that licked the walls. Chaos erupted. Lady Alice Karstark locked eyes with Qyburn across the hall. She held a spear, the tip of which glinted black in the flickering light, dragonglass. Qyburn recognized the style. A piece of weirwood for the shaft, black obsidian for the point. She shouted a war cry, leading 6 men forward. An abomination sprang to intercept. Her spear flashed once, twice, embedding in the abomination's chest. It snarled, black fluid spurting, but it was not an immediate kill. Another rebel hammered the abomination's flank with an axe, trying to dislodge the runic talisman. The creature convulsed. Qyburn stepped aside, letting 2 more of his monstrous lords close in. The fight devolved into brutal pandemonium. Steel clashed, men screamed. The stench of wildfire smoke thickened. The rebels tried to coordinate, but Qyburn's brood had the advantage of savage strength and fearlessness. One abomination battered a knight to the ground, caving in the man's breastplate with repeated blows. Another seized a rebel archer by the throat, lifting him bodily and hurling him into a burning patch of wildfire. Agonized shrieks filled the air. Still, the rebels fought on with desperate determination. Lady Cassana Swan dueled 2 abominations at once, weaving expertly, delivering well-placed cuts. A moan from across the hall revealed that an abomination had gone down to a spear jab precisely through the runic bone. Fire crackled as the fortress interior burned, sending hot embers swirling. Smoke drifted in choking waves. Qyburn coughed, pressing a cloth to his mouth, trying to see through the haze. Suddenly, from behind a cracked pillar, Lady Alice Karstark lunged at him, spear aimed at his heart. Qyburn stumbled back, narrowly avoiding impalement. The spear's tip caught his robe, tearing the fabric and grazing his shoulder. He hissed in pain and fury. With no time to chant a full incantation, he yanked a small flask from his belt, an acid-like substance that burned flesh. He flung it at her. She twisted aside, but some droplets splashed her bracer, hissing. She advanced again undeterred. Her eyes blazed with fierce hatred. "You," she snarled, leveling the spear. "You turned my kin into a monster." Qyburn sneered. "I improved him." She lunged once more, the spear whistling in a deadly arc. This time, Qyburn ducked behind a toppled bench. The spear lodged in splintered wood. He seized the chance to scramble backward, summoning 2 abominations to shield him. They rushed forward, one with a short sword, the other with a spiked mace. Lady Alice withdrew her spear and braced for their assault. Now the hall was an inferno of swirling smoke and half-collapsed beams. Rebels and abominations fought in pockets of savage combat. Qyburn saw Allard Brax appear at the hall's rear entry, leading 2 abominations from the flank. They cut off an escape route, cornering half the rebels. The courtyard beyond shimmered with green fire, as one of the rebels had evidently lobbed more wildfire there. A thunderous crash shook the fortress as part of the roof fell in, sending a flare of sparks. Smoke stung Qyburn's eyes. He coughed violently, hearing screams and the clang of weapons. The rebels were pinned, but so were his abominations. The entire fortress was turning into a fiery death trap. If they lingered too long, both sides might perish. Qyburn forced a shout through the cacophony. "Seize who you can, then withdraw." He saw an abomination tackle Lady Cassanna Swan, slamming her into a crumbling wall. Another pinned a wounded knight underfoot. Lady Alice Karstark fought on, scorching fury in her strikes, but one abomination knocked the spear aside. She was forced to yield ground, sliding on rubble. Smoke and flame roiled overhead, and the floor began to shudder ominously. "Master!" Allard Brax's voice rang out. "The place is coming down." Qyburn gestured frantically, choking on smoke. "Take prisoners. We flee now." In the flickering chaos, abominations dragged a handful of injured rebels through the collapsed entry. Qyburn, staggering, spotted Lady Alice Karstark near a fiery patch. She clutched a wound on her left arm, but her spear remained in hand. Their eyes locked. For a brief second, Qyburn considered ordering his brood to seize her specifically. Her knowledge made her valuable. But before he could command it, a blazing beam crashed between them, blocking the path. Sparks and embers rained like molten hail. The fortress rumbled, stone groaning. Through the smoke, Qyburn heard Lady Alice's defiant cry, "We will never yield." Then the roof caved in. A thunderous roar swallowed all. Qyburn reeled backward, his ears ringing, as dust and debris rolled through the hall. One abomination shielded him from the brunt of the collapse, taking hits from flying chunks of stone. Fighting for air, Qyburn scrambled out, half-blinded. He found the fortress courtyard lit by flames, the swirling wind carrying embers upward. Several abominations clustered there, dragging 2 or 3 unconscious rebels. Others, battered, emerged from side passages. The entire building swayed. Another crash, and a tower collapsed inward, sending a mushroom cloud of dust and ash skyward. "Retreat!" Qyburn coughed. "Back to the bridge." They fled into the stormy night, crossing the precarious bridge as the fortress behind them continued to collapse in a maelstrom of flame and ruin. Behind, screams and the roar of fire merged into a single dreadful lament. Once on safer ground, Qyburn glanced back, chest heaving. Grey Watch had become an inferno. No sign of survivors climbing out, though it was impossible to be certain in the swirling chaos. Lightning forked across the sky, revealing the carnage. Of the 24 or more rebels, Qyburn's brood had captured perhaps half a dozen, dead or alive. The rest were likely crushed or burned, or they had slipped away in the chaos. The abominations formed a ragged circle around Qyburn, some wounded, some missing armor plates. One had half its face melted by wildfire, exposing runic etchings in the bone beneath. Blood smoked on the wet ground. Thunder rumbled again, announcing fresh rain that began to pelt the battlefield. "We have them," Allard Brack said, indicating the limp forms of the captured. "What are your orders, master?" Qyburn surveyed the trembling rebels. One was Lady Cassana Swan, evidently knocked unconscious rather than killed. Another appeared to be a younger knight from the north, half delirious with a head wound. The rest were lesser Sellswords. Not the ideal prize. Lady Alice Karstark was nowhere to be seen, presumably lost or buried in the blaze. Pity, Qyburn thought. She had shown promise as a strategic mind. He shook off the thought. "We return to King's Landing. The Queen will want these prisoners," he said, controlling his breath. "We'll glean any intelligence from them before deciding their fate." Inwardly, Qyburn was torn. The fortress's destruction likely spelled the end for many rebel leaders, a major victory for the crown. Yet from the savage fighting, it was clear the rebels had grown more dangerous than ever. The losses among his brood were not insignificant. Perhaps a small price to pay if indeed Lady Alice and her allies were dead. But something in him could not shake a sense of unease. Had they truly wiped out the rebellion's core, or had they merely scattered it, forcing the survivors into yet more elusive shapes? He signaled for the abominations to hoist the prisoners onto the cart. As they trundled away from Greywatch, the flames continued to dance in the night, lighting the rain-swept sky with ruddy flickers. Qyburn's mind churned with new questions. How to refine his brood against a threat that kept adapting. Even if the rebels were crippled, they had left scars on his creations. Rumors would spread that the fortress battle had been cataclysmic. The journey south was grim. 3 of the prisoners died en route from their injuries. Lady Cassana Swan remained alive, but delirious. Qyburn's abominations, too, showed signs of strain. The partial repairs that had once sealed their runes threatened to unravel under repeated blasts of wildfire and obsidian. By the time they arrived back in King's Landing, the silent group looked as though they had dragged themselves from the very pits of some underworld. Cersei received Qyburn in the throne room. By that hour, evening had settled, the torches lighting the columns in shifting patterns of gold and shadow. She waited on the iron throne, posture rigid, draped in black and crimson. She listened to Qyburn's report of success with measured satisfaction. The mention of heavy losses among the abominations did not trouble her as much as the possibility that some rebels might have fled. Still, she exulted in the fact that the largest known rebel council was shattered, and that she now held Lady Cassana Swan as a captive. "Do what you must to make her talk," Cersei commanded, her tone a blade of ice. "And once you have the answers, let her join your collection, or feed her to Ser Gregor if you prefer." Qyburn bowed. "As you wish, Your Grace. I will begin at once." He turned to leave, but Cersei called after him. "And Qyburn, well done. The realm will learn of our victory here. Let them see that defiance brings only fire and death." He allowed himself a small, deferential smile. "The realm is yours, Your Grace." Yet, as he descended to the dungeon with his battered abominations and half-conscious prisoners, he felt no real triumph. His brood was strong, yes, but not invulnerable. The infiltration had worked, but rebel cunning had cost him. A few more battles like that, and who would be left to enforce the Queen's will? Moreover, the uneasy notion that Lady Alice Karstark or others might have escaped alive gnawed at him. They had proven formidable foes. Should they regroup or discover some new tactic, the crown could face a renewed onslaught. But for the moment, Qyburn pushed such doubts aside. He had immediate work, interrogations, transformations, the ceaseless labor of forging an empire of living nightmares. The future might hold more challenges, but the present was his domain. He had carved a throne of horrors within the Red Keep's bowels, and neither the howling storm nor the fury of scattered rebels would stop him now. He stepped into his lair, the torches sputtering in the stale air. The prisoners were lined up, some moaning, some silent, at the foot of the stone slab where so many before them had been broken and reshaped. Qyburn's tools glinted ominously. His abominations stood guard, each bearing fresh wounds from Greywatch, but still upright, still loyal. He approached Lady Cassana Swan, who groaned and tried to lift her head. Blood matted her dark hair, and her face was set in a grimace. "Welcome to my home," Qyburn said softly, picking up a gleaming scalpel. "There is so much we can learn from each other." Her glare held the last flicker of defiance. "I'll never talk," she rasped. He smiled gently. "I've heard that before, my lady." With a small, precise movement, he began, and as the Red Keep trembled with her muffled cries, Qyburn pressed onward, forging the next chapter of his unholy dominion, blind to the storm still brewing beyond. Whether Lady Cassana would yield or not mattered little in the long run, so long as Qyburn continued perfecting his art. For each rebel who fell, more would stand. Yet with every captive torn apart on his slab, Qyburn honed the darkness that underpinned the crown's power. Outside, the moon rose high above King's Landing, illuminating rooftops and alleyways with cold silver light. The city slept in uneasy silence, not knowing that in the depths of the Red Keep, a woman's spirit shattered, her screams echoing beneath the stones, and that the forging of an army of nightmares marched on, step by bloody step.